The Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time was released in the US by Walt Disney Studios on May 28, 2010. It's a loose adaptation of the popular 2003 video game of the same name, set in the medieval Kingdom of Persia.
There once rose an empire that stretched from the steppes of China to the shores of the Mediterranean.
Jake Gyllenhaal stars as Dastan, a young orphan who is adopted by King Shahraman of Persia and raised as an equal with his two other sons, the heir to the throne, Prince Tuss, and his younger brother, Prince Garsiv. Ben Kingsley plays Nizam, brother and trusted advisor to the king. Nizam convinces Prince Tuss that the city of Alamet is producing weapons for their enemies, encouraging him to invade the city. Dastan leads the charge and during the attack finds a strange-looking dagger, but no evidence of weapon forges.
We have no forges here.
Undaunted, Prince Tuss offers to make Tamina, the princess of Alamet, one of his wives, so that there may be peace.
I'll die first.
Otherwise, he'll have his man slit her throat.
Shoot!
Ain't he a peach? Later, King Shahraman arrives in the city, and a banquet is held in his honor. During the banquet, Dastan gifts a holy robe to his adopted father that, unbeknownst to Dastan, is laced with a highly caustic acid which burns the king to death.
Somebody help him!
Looking like an assassin, Dastan flees for his life with the princess. Oh, and that dagger Dastan found? It's got a special button on it that can send its wielder back in time. That's all you really need to know for my purposes, because we're not here to talk about the crappy story or lifeless dialogue. We're here to talk about race, baby. Now, you may have noticed that this cast looks a little pale for being set in Persia. Appearances are sometimes deceiving, though, so let's look at the cast and see if we can pick out any Persians. Or, since the film tells us the Kingdom of Persia spanned quite a distance, let's see if we can find any Kurds or Turks or Arabs or any other ethnic group from the Middle East or West Asia that could realistically be part of the kingdom. There are a lot of options there. Let's start with the King of Persia himself. Certainly, if anyone were going to be a Persian, it would be him. Let's see, he's played by Ronald Pickup, an Englishman. And oh boy, does he look it. His eldest son and heir, Prince Tuss, is played by Richard Coyle, an Englishman. And his second eldest son, Prince Garsiv, played by Toby Kebbell, is also an Englishman. Well, what about Dastan, the adopted son of the king? Surely, being adopted, he would look somewhat different from his family. Well, Jake Gyllenhaal has Swedish and English ancestry. Now, to be fair, on Gyllenhaal's mother's side, he has Russian and Polish Jewish ancestry. Similarly, while Gemma Arterton, who portrays Princess Tamina, is, you guessed it, mostly English, she also has European Jewish ancestry. I suppose there is an argument to be made that this qualifies them to be in the Prince of Persia, because the Kingdom of Persia includes Israel, but that's kind of like saying, since we all originated in Africa, it would be okay if Matthew McConaughey played Nelson Mandela. The final member of the royal family is the king's conniving brother, Nizam, played by Ben Kingsley. Kingsley is half English and half Gujarati Indian, and while Gujarat was not part of the Kingdom of Persia as shown on the map, I think it's fair to say that of all the cast members, he is the closest to being believably Persian. And isn't it a weird coincidence that the least white member of the cast is also the villain of the piece? And they all have English accents, of course, including Gyllenhaal, one of the few Americans in the cast.
Oh, I wouldn't do that if I were you.
Only further highlighting the absurdity of all these Northern Europeans playing West Asians. Somehow the English accent has become the de rigueur accent for any people outside of America and existing prior to the 20th century. I blame Shakespeare. The Merchant of Venice, Romeo and Juliet, Much Ado About Nothing. Too many Brits have played too many Italians for too long.
It's hard for me to admit, but you were right.
You may be wondering, what does it matter if a bunch of white people play dress up in The Prince of Persia? It doesn't hurt anybody, and they aren't trying to offend anyone. They just want to make their silly little adventure movie. Well, let's get into it. I see two major problems with white people portraying non-white people. First is the racist history of minstrelsy, that is, blackface, where white actors would caricature black stereotypes in order to mock and belittle them for entertainment. Similar, but distinct to blackface is brownface, yellowface, redface, etc., where white actors would play characters of color, invariably with the effect, if sometimes not the intent, of reducing them to stereotyped stock figures, like the Mexican bandit, the opium-addled Chinese, the noble savage Indian. The second problem is one of representation. Many actors of color struggle to get large roles in films unless the film explicitly calls for a person of color to play that role. Imagine being a Native American actor and getting passed over for the role of Tonto in The Lone Ranger for Johnny Depp. Imagine being a Japanese actor and discovering that they are changing the race of the Major in Ghost in the Shell to a white woman so that Scarlett Johansson can play her. Now, you might be thinking, Johnny Depp and Scarlett Johansson are some of the biggest actors of all time. There are no Native American actors that are even close to as famous as Johnny Depp. There are no Japanese actors that are even close to as famous as Scarlett Johansson. But that's exactly the point. How are actors of color ever supposed to get famous enough to lead a big movie if white people are always taking their roles? They are being purposefully excluded from those opportunities. Most people don't care if one white person plays a different type of white person, which brings up an interesting question, the answer of which may invalidate everything I've been saying in this video. Are Persians white? If you look at the character from the 2003 Prince of Persia video game, Jake Gyllenhaal really doesn't look too different. And the sprite from the original 1989 Prince of Persia game actually appears to be a white man with sandy blonde hair, modeled after the brother of the creator, who is apparently of European Jewish descent. I'm looking up some pictures of different Iranian faces, trying to detect what makes them look different from Europeans, in an effort to nail down some mystical definition of what white is, and I'm starting to feel like I'm practicing phrenology. The fact is, many Persians could walk right in front of me, and if someone asked me if they were white, if I had no other information, I'd probably reply in the affirmative. At a certain point, white ceases to be a useful term, if it ever was one to begin with. It's well known that the Irish, Italians, and Jews were not considered white at some point in time in America. So, what is white? It's bullshit is what it is. It's all made up. Are Greeks white? Zach Galifianakis sure looks it. Jason Mantzoukas, not so much. Sacha Baron Cohen has played an Arab in The Dictator, a Kazakh in Borat, and a Frenchman in Talladega Nights, despite being a man of European Jewish descent. Yes, those films are absurd comedies, but Prince of Persia is hardly serious cinema, and I don't think anyone really thought it was inherently ludicrous for Cohen to be playing those characters. Why should Cohen get away with it while Gyllenhaal, another man of European Jewish descent, doesn't? Well, it's obvious, really. Optics. Gyllenhaal is unmistakably white-looking, while Cohen's darker features mark him as ambiguously ethnic. The concept of whiteness is, like all racial categories, a social construct. That's not to say that it doesn't exist, merely that the definition is fluid and depends on the cultural subconscious perception of any given population. I don't think of Persians as white, but I don't really know why. Many Persians have fair skin. If it's okay to have a Northern European man play a Southern European man, like in the Shakespearean tradition, is it not okay for a Southern European man to play a Persian? The distance from London to Athens is roughly the same as the distance from Athens to Tehran. Representation in art is a struggle. These are hard questions with no definitive answers. The problem is the Prince of Persia didn't even attempt to grapple with them. They made no effort whatsoever. Gyllenhaal is not even in the neighborhood of Persian. He's primarily of Swedish descent. It's laughable, it's offensive, and it's shocking that Gyllenhaal would ever think that it was acceptable. This is not a simple issue, and people are going to have a variety of feelings on the topic. I haven't seen Tropic Thunder in many years, but I really remember enjoying Robert Downey Jr.'s blackface performance. Despite the three main Japanese characters of Memoirs of a Geisha being played by Chinese actors, I still really enjoy that film. Despite the blatant and hateful racism in Breakfast at Tiffany's, it's still one of my favorite movies of all time. I think it's pointless and stupid to blind yourself to the offensive nature of art you love. It may not offend you, but that doesn't mean others that are offended are wrong to feel that way. White portrayals of perceived non-white characters will always offend. as long as the history of minstrelsy still stings, as long as Hollywood continues to discriminate against actors and characters of color, and frankly, as long as racism remains firmly rooted in our country. It ain't being fixed in our lifetimes, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. I really appreciate you sticking it out to the end. This is a big topic that I'm sure I'll continue to explore in future videos. Please let me know in the comments which films or topics you'd like to hear my take on. And consider giving me a subscribe if you want to see more.